So welcome back, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you had a good lunch. As you can see, the hair tonic worked. The hair grew back, but unfortunately I shrunk. So I'm not quite the Sven I was or should be, but let me try to cover for him in his absence. So this afternoon we're going to focus on two chapters of the RCEP agreement, trade in services and investment. So we're going to start with trade in services, which is chapter 8 of the RCEP agreement. And this is one that for me always contains a lot of the sort of terminology that I always find difficult to get my head around and understand, all these phrases like national treatment and most favored nation. But anyway, hopefully we'll be able to move away from some of the terminology and understand the implications. And of course, we are joined by, for this first session, two experts who will be able to help us understand this chapter. So firstly, can I welcome back on stage a very familiar face by now, Deborah Elms. And can I also invite Nongchit KHAMBOUNHEUANG? Apologies for the pronunciation. Nongchit is a director at the Department of Foreign Trade Policy, focusing on services. So welcome. Do you want, so last time, whilst you presented?
Yeah.
Nongchit. Yeah. So are you presenting first? Yeah. So I will hand over to Deborah to present first. Thanks.
My slides are coming, yes? Fantastic. Okay, thank you all very much, and happy to be here to talk about, this morning, for me, again, a little sad that the e-commerce chapter was less exciting in terms of what it actually delivers for trade. This chapter on services and the one that follows it later on investment actually is, I think, extraordinarily meaningful. We focus a lot when we talk about trade agreements on the benefits that come from trade in goods and on the tariff reductions that you get in a trade agreement. And we do that because I think those are easy to see and grasp. We know what goods are. You can see them, you can kick them, you can have it fall on your toe. So you know what a good is, and it's relatively easy to imagine trade in goods. We know what a tariff is. That's what trade agreements deal with. That's easy. Services, though, is becoming an important part of every economy. And once you move into developed economy status, usually 60 to even 70% of your economy is actually services-based, not goods-based. And so having good rules that open up trade and services is increasingly important. And I'm happy to say that RCEP actually delivers a lot for companies in services, and then next one on investment as well. So I think although we focus a lot on trade and goods, the real benefit, in my view, from RCEP is actually the services and investment provisions, because they're quite new, they're quite different. They're not duplicating what ASEAN has already done. They're actually innovative on their own. And so let me go through some of this. Now, Jeremy is right that the services language can be very unhelpful. So I apologize. I will try not to make this complicated. This one you've seen, just to again note that we have 12 members in RCEP already in force. Next. Wow, this thing is just like inconsistent. There we go. Again, this one you've mostly seen, but what I want to notice here is that we have ASEAN's existing ASEAN +1 agreements. Most of them, as I will mention, for services and then later for investment, are weak or non-existent. So RCEP is better because it actually has rules and it has commitments. But, and this I do want to note, Lao received a number of extensions in this chapter and in the investment chapter, but especially in this chapter. So do read the text and the schedules fairly carefully if you want to find out what this agreement delivers for your business. And all those texts and schedules are available. Oh, there, shoot. Excellent. Okay. So as we know, we already do a lot of trade and services. We have services companies, a lot of them are here, foreign services companies, who have been sitting with us for up to 2 days now. And so most of them did not arrive because RCEP came into force. They were here already. So we've had lots of trade and services. We've had lots of investment. But prior to RCEP, we did not have access and the protection of services and investment commitments that were guaranteed in a trade agreement. So yes, you could come, you could set up a company, you could deliver services, you could deliver cross-border services, but that access was not guaranteed or protected, could be revoked at any time with no consequence for the government. And the rules could shift very quickly, leaving a firm with no real recourse, no warning, no opportunity to change their policies. So one of the best parts of RCEP is actually hard to see, but very valuable for companies, which is we have a set of rules that govern trade and services that affects what the government can and cannot do to services companies in their market. And those rules are now consistent across all of the 12 participating economies. So that's very, very helpful. It's even helpful for firms that are not RCEP firms. So if you are a European company here in Lao, you can still benefit from RCEP, even though the European Union is not a member of RCEP, because some of those rule changes will spill over or will be delivered to you. So if I promise, as an example, to limit licensing commitments, I have to limit licensing commitments for everyone. I can't just say because you're an RCEP firm, you get less licenses. And because you are not an RCEP firm, you have to do more licenses. Usually it spills over. So this is excellent news. And like the rest of this agreement, it has a services part has two elements. There's the rules in the chapter, and then all of the country-specific schedules where each government said, here's what I will do for services trade. So very specific commitments in here, and I will show you examples of those. The original ASEAN +1 agreements are awful for services. We often had no services commitments at all. So as an example, ASEAN Japan never managed to do the services and investment part. And so by default, RCEP is better. Because if we never had rules before, or we had only poor rules, then these rules have to be better. And that's excellent. But for companies, I will tell you that the way that RCEP members made specific country commitments is extra complicated for companies. So I will tell you up front. It's hard because half of the members did things one way and half of the members did things another way. And these two approaches are completely opposite one another. So as a company, when you say, what can I do in this country that I couldn't do before? It's more complicated than it should be, because you have to say, are they using one set of approaches or another set? And that will tell you how to read their schedules. So that is complicated. But 12 years from now, if you're still in business, you will have benefits where everyone agreed to use the same approach. So in 12 years, we will all be on the same page, which would be great. So I'll get to the schedules in a second, but do note that the rules in the chapter are the same for all. So everyone agreed to the same rules. Everyone agreed, for example, to limit qualifications and licensing requirements. And we heard before lunch why that matters so much to companies. The more that I put in place licensing and qualification restrictions on foreign services providers, the harder it is for foreign services providers to operate. RCEP had members pledge to reduce licensing and qualification when not necessary. Doesn't say what that is, but it does make the member governments promise to look at licensing and qualification and make sure that it is no more trade restrictive than necessary for a legitimate purpose. You know, will that solve the problems that Food Panda has with 3 times 18 times every year licensing? I can't promise, but it should be viewed as trade restrictive, and should government of Lao be fixed so that we do not have this restriction in place in the future. There are also, and this is important for companies, there is a long list of what we call performance requirements that are now prohibited. This matters a lot for services firms because we often have in past agreements performance requirements like you may only open 1 clinic. Your whole country can get 1 clinic, or 4 ATM machines, or 1 hospital, or 12 foreign doctors. And so that is a performance requirement, and those are to be lifted and prohibited in the future, including, and I think this is also important, some of our equity requirements and how you create a firm in an RCEP market. So fewer qualifications, fewer restrictions on equity, fewer need for joint venture partners. Those JV partners may not, depending on the experience, be majority shareholders. There are fewer requirements for local staff, fewer requirements even for staff at boards of directors and management, senior management. So there are a long list of performance requirements that are now prohibited in RCEP. And you can look at the chapter and go through and see if they apply to you. If they apply to you, then you have good grounds to tell the government that this is contrary to their requirements under RCEP. So I think that that's very helpful, because those performance requirements can make it more difficult and more expensive to deliver services into a market like Lao. And it can be more difficult for Lao service providers to provide services into other RCEP markets. So it's not just inbound, it's also external. So here is the, did I skip 2? Sorry, let me just check. It doesn't want to go back. No, it is this one. Okay, so I told you that we had half of the members use one approach to listing down their commitments, and the other half used a different approach. So this slide, if it will turn again for me, shows you which members did which. Ay, ay, ay. Why is it not? There we go. So you can see that the top half is what we call positive listing. Most, but not all, of ASEAN, including Lao, used positive list scheduling. And the bottom set of countries used what we call negative list scheduling. All of them agreed to switch to negative listing, including the government of Lao. Lao has 12 years. Most of the rest of the list have 8 years to make that transition. And I will note, actually, at the ASEAN level, you've all agreed at the ASEAN level to switch to negative listing as well. So you will have negative listing coming in Lao and most of ASEAN in a very short amount of time. So government of Lao, pay attention because you have negative listing coming. So what's the difference between them? And this again matters for companies who are trying to unravel this agreement. Under the positive list is I, as a government, tell you what you can do. So I write it down if I'm going to allow you as an RCEP company to deliver that service. If I didn't write it down, you don't get to do it. So let's imagine, and I'll show you an example in just a second, bookkeeping. If I don't want foreign RCEP bookkeepers to deliver bookkeeping services in Lao under a positive list, I don't write it down. So if you are a foreign service bookkeeper, you look through the schedule for Lao, you don't see bookkeeping, you know there's no commitment, no change as a result of RCEP. If you see it, you're happy, because it means that as a foreign RCEP bookkeeper, there is something that Lao said you could do. So some kind of services are allowed. Now, what that is, we'll get into in just a second. Okay, so that's positive list. I tell you what I'm going to allow you to do. Used by half of the members, including the Lao government. The other half used what is called a negative list. Okay, so a negative list says you can do all services. 160 services and subsectors in services are now open for RCEP competition unless I tell you you cannot do it. Okay, so a negative list is everything is open except for those things I tell you are closed. Okay, so this requires, think about this in your head, two very different approaches. Under positive list, if I see the service, I can do it. Under negative list, if I see the service, I can't do it. Okay, so this can be challenging for companies because you are totally different here. Both of them, I will note, are subject to some internal restrictions, like the potential need for licensing or for professional requirements. So I may say you can do bookkeeping, but my local bookkeeping association requires that you take an exam and you requalify every 5 years, and it's only offered in Lao. So if that's the case, that's still allowed because it's a domestic internal licensing restriction. But you can at least provide the service assuming you meet the requirements, okay? And again, in 12 years, Lao agreed that it would switch to negative listing. Okay, so let me show you what this looks like. This is the schedule here. Oh, here's bookkeeping, look at that. How happy is that? I don't have a pointer, do I? Oh, it looks like a pointer, but it's not a pointer. Okay, so this is what a positive schedule looks like. I will not go into all of this because it's too complicated and you'll all cry. But what you care about is the thing on the left, which is the list of services that the Lao government has agreed RCEP companies can provide here in Lao for these two categories of professional services. Now the schedule is longer than this. I've only cut a piece of this out so you can see it. So there's two that are shown here. One is kinds of legal services. And the second box down is accounting, auditing, and bookkeeping. So these are the two services that we're talking about. So if you're a bookkeeper, you're already feeling pretty happy about this because Lao gave something for bookkeepers. The next column shows you what did they do under what we call market access. So what kind of bookkeeping services can you provide? And the next column over says, can they discriminate? National treatment is discrimination. Did they agree that they would not discriminate against foreign bookkeepers, RCEP bookkeepers? Or did they agree that there would be provisions just for Lao bookkeepers, different from RCEP bookkeepers? So you want to see in here that your service is here, that there are commitments made. That's very good news. Now, this is, I don't know if I really want to get into weeds here. It's a bit complicated, but the language that we use in trade agreements is upside down and backwards from normal people on services. And so I always get it wrong. Every time I teach this, I get none and unbound backwards. So the point here is the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 is 4 different ways that we can deliver a service. The first one is where the service moves like digital, but we don't move. The second one is where you move to do the service. So you would go to a bookkeeper in a foreign country. The third one is really investment. Bookkeeping comes to us, sets up a bookkeeping office. And the fourth one is where I, as a bookkeeper, move to deliver the service. So I come to Lao once a month or something to deliver bookkeeping service. Under this schedule, the first 3 things are fine. The last one is really not, because the fourth one is about movement of people, and everybody was very restrictive on movement of people, the individual bookkeeper. Not moving for immigration, but moving to deliver bookkeeping service. Okay, so the point of this is you can look at it and you can say, well, there are a few challenges around bookkeeping. You can see, particularly point 3, you have to have a JV with a Lao national accountant who is also on the certified public accountants in order for me to set up bookkeeping here as an RCEP firm. And you can see the next one, majority of directors also have to be certified accountants who are Lao nationals. The net result is I probably can't, as a foreign bookkeeper, actually set up an account office here because I would have to hire everybody but me. So the point is that you could see some of the restrictions. So a positive list looks like this. Again, what am I doing? If I wrote it down, I'm giving you access to something. The first column tells you market access. What can you do now to get into the market? The second column tells you what, if any, are the restrictions that are discriminatory against me as an RCEP foreign, whatever it is, bookkeeper, lawyer, legal service. Okay, so that's a positive list. This is how ASEAN used to do all of its negotiations. So all previous negotiations that Lao was involved in used this scheduling method. Governments love it. Governments love it because governments say, I know exactly what I agreed to do. I gave you bookkeeping, except for these requirements about setting up with local accountants. I know what I did. And if I didn't mean to open it, I didn't write it down. So I feel very comfortable with that. Companies generally hate this because companies don't understand, what am I even looking at? I don't know what's a 1 and what's a 3, and I don't know what's national treatment, and I don't know what's market. So companies are less excited, but government loves it. So up until recently, this was how we did all schedules, including ASEAN schedules, including World Trade Organization schedules. Increasingly, we are moving to a new approach, which half of the RCEP members used, called a negative list. And the negative list, again, everything is open. You want to be a lawyer, be a lawyer. You want to be a bookkeeper, be a bookkeeper. Unless I tell you otherwise, you can deliver it. So this is Malaysia's negative list. And the way that you read this is you start at the top. This doesn't have anything to do with bookkeeping. This is about real estate services. So Malaysia is saying to you, the person looking at Malaysia's schedule, real estate services are restricted. Real estate services on a fee or contract basis have some kind of restrictions. So we're telling you here there's a problem. Then it tells you, if you go down, at the central and regional government, we are violating 2 rules in RCEP, one on national treatment and one on local presence. Then we have the description of what is the problem. So the description here says that only registered persons and authorized foreigners registered with the Board of Valuers, Appraisals, estate agents, and property managers can provide real estate services for a fee or on a contract basis. So that's the problem. The problem is this rule. And below it, it tells you where are those rules or laws located in our legal code. So you can see since 1981, this has been the rule in Malaysia. Malaysia is telling its RCEP partners, we're not changing this law. This is the law. And so if you want to provide real estate services on a fee or contract basis, you probably cannot unless you meet this rule in the middle. If you want to provide real estate services not on a fee or contract basis, that may be provided. We have to look at the rest of their schedule. So the point again with negative list, you can do whatever you want unless there is a restriction that the government has noted. If they failed to note the restriction, it's now open for RCEP competition. So governments tend to be nervous about this approach, right? Because if I forgot to write something down, all of a sudden now I'm open for competition. So that's a bit nerve-wracking, especially the first time. Whoa. But companies like it because now a company says, well, I don't want to sell real estate in Malaysia, so I don't care about this restriction. I never plan to sell real estate. I don't plan to sell real estate in the future. I don't care that this is still restricted. So again, on the one, if we see it, we're happy, we can deliver it. On the other, if we see it, we are not happy because we can't deliver it. Okay, so that's the difference between these. Oh, I think I skipped one. No, I did not skip one. Okay, so this is the two approaches. So in order for you to figure out what can you do in RCEP, you need to read the chapter and see whether it applies, and then you need to look at the schedule, and you need to see whether or not the services that you are providing are included or excluded. And I think, and this is the good news, although it doesn't show up on the slides, the good news is that for most of you, the range of services that you can provide, even in positive list schedules, is much bigger than anything we've seen before. So for most of you, unless you happen to be in a highly sensitive sector, like maritime transport, tends to be highly sensitive, and everybody is restrictive on that. As long as you're not trying to drive a boat, most of you doing most of the services in this room are fine in delivering them in RCEP, including other potentially sensitive ones, legal services, often sensitive, often opened in RCEP. I think that's useful. Taxi driving, often opened. Tour guides, often closed, but in RCEP, most of them are opened. So there's a whole lot of new attempt to provide opening for services providers. And ultimately then you should have a much easier time delivering services between and across RCEP countries, any way that you want to deliver them, online, in person, through investment, whatever. And you can start to create a sort of Asian market for trade and services. And that, I think, is a very big deal. And then one more thing, which I keep forgetting to mention, is there's supposed to be an RCEP secretariat coming, fingers crossed, end of the year. And they will also help manage this process. And they will be available if you had questions, if you had complaints, because we haven't discussed the dispute settlement procedures. But if a government is failing to follow the rules, depending on the rules, you can have dispute settlement where your government would complain to that government and then they sort it all out. So this is much better for services providers. And the bottom line with RCEP on services is we now have consistent rules across the 12 participating markets, and we have much more ambitious, much broader commitments that individual governments have made to allow the flow of services in between RCEP markets. So if you're in the services sector, and even if you just trade in goods, you're actually probably also doing services. This results in more opportunities and lowered costs, most likely, for you to procure services or for you potentially to deliver services. So I think it's a very good news thing for RCEP. And again, it's not talked about very often because it's hard for me to say how many new bookkeepers will we have, or how many new bookkeeping services might we have after this agreement comes fully into force. That's hard. So that's why we don't focus on it very often. But actually, again, if you need bookkeeping services and the price just went down and you can have access to a whole lot more bookkeepers, that's great news for you, because that can deliver real bottom line benefits to your company even if you're not a bookkeeper, because it's not just what you deliver, it's also what you consume as a consumer of these services. So let me change this slide. It doesn't want to, and say thank you very much. And I will be back, I guess, in a minute for more questions. So thanks.
Thank you, Deborah. Let's go on straight on to our second presentation by Mr. Nongchit. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's quite difficult in the afternoon after have a big lunch, listening to the presentation. I think it's not easy. My name is Nongchit, coming from the Department of Trade Foreign Policy. I'm in charge of Trade and Service Division under ASEAN Plus One and RCEP. I would like to share with you how it's important, what important in RCEP, how it's different between RCEP and ASEAN Plus One and GATS, and what are the application under each, and what we are obliged to do in trade in services, because within a short time, it's quite technical. Some of them you understand deeply. I think during Q&A, you can ask me later on. I'm happy to answer. Next slide, please. Due to limited time, I'll talk about the chapter as mentioned earlier. In fact, trade and services chapter, it's quite a kind of a strange term in RCEP agreement. It's developed from ASEAN Plus One. We made it with India, ANZ, ASEAN Japan, ASEAN China, and Korea. So those developed from those ground. RCEP occurred because negotiation ASEAN Plus One, it happened quite different times. That's why the final negotiation, for example, negotiation with ANZ, for example, with Japan, the ambitious of marketing opening is different. Sometimes they are not happy. That's why they go for RCEP. And it's developed from ASEAN Plus One, because there's a merging of 6 group of countries with ASEAN. Unfortunately, India withdraw, the last minute. But India, if India come in, they will be open up more trade and services. And so the difference, I talk about the difference. And what I realize is quite dominant, we have M&P agreement. So, I mean, labor migration, this is quite important. I'll also mention that as well. The most important thing is opportunity and challenges. So government, what the challenge for government, what challenges for the private sector firms they have also. Now looking at the opportunities. RCEP in general, I would say it's an agreement, modern agreements, open up opportunity for investor, not only domestic investor and foreign investor. It protect the investor as well. For example, what potential we have, we can open up the opportunity for investor within RCEP country. Based on the liberalization, a lot of people may concern about, for example, FTA, free trade agreements, that means you liberalize the trade. Some people avoid the concern. I think depending on the existing regulation, for example, we open up trade in services, we have about 160 subsector in services certified by GATT, 12 main sector will not open up. So things that are controlled by law and regulations, we can open up, Like I said, RCEP is quite broad, 15 countries, covering 15 countries that are member states. And that's why trade and services covering 30% of global share. You look at the population covering 30% of the population. That's quite, RCEP is quite broad and big. A lot of people say RCEP agreement is quite smelling good, for investor. In other words, because it's very clear, clearly mentioned, and it's an agreement that modern, as mentioned, Dr. Deborah mentioned, is a modern. What you can do will be stipulated in the RCEP agreement. It's clearly stipulated that the most important thing, domestic regulation, it has to mention clearly in there, not just like coming in and hesitating. We cannot facilitate, or the investor will not have a clear, mind for other agreements. So the scope set quite clear and clear in RCEP. The structure, for example, like market access, market opening, what are the equipment as mentioned by Dr. Deborah? Those are new for us. I would just touch on that a little bit on the opening up market, positive and negative. The commitment. Easy to understand. Positive means that what we open, put in the commitment, and the rest we not open. I mean, in positive list, the full form market access. So it's identified there. If that is not there, meaning I'm not opening up, it's a technical term. I will touch a little bit on that. In conclusion, in Chapter 8, there are 25 articles developed for ASEAN+1 agreement. As I mentioned, it mentioned detail, in the scope, how broad the cooperation, what are the application, transparency is important, allow commitment, the approach, the two approaches of opening, as mentioned by Dr. Deborah. In terms of safeguard and cooperation, so this is important. For example, internally, you impose a certain regulation, you need to inform, you need to announce to a member state. That's a coordination mechanism. It mentioned in Chapter 25. And the newly that we don't have in ASEAN+1, we have 3 annexes relating to financial services, telecom services, and professional service. This is the new things that we don't have in ASEAN+1. I like to walk you to the highlight one. In the 25 articles, we have opening mechanism. Positive and negative is how different they are. Positive is, for example, mentioned in GATS, we use a positive list approach. It's easy, it's easy. What I open, when you look at that, the positive, let's say, it would be easy. It's like the 12 main sector, subsector 160. I would open them. Which subsector I open, I just identified it, for example, market access. A certain sector is 100%. Some sector, I only applied the, I put the criteria that you have to have a joint venture or something. Even all sector, for example, for example, we can put in horizontal commitment, for example, land lease or something. We identify quite detailed there. That's a positive. This in Lao will be which one we open, we leave it there, and the rest is not there. We're not open. For negative list, it's a form of close, open and close. You may get confused. Open and close. I mean everything. Everything cannot appear in the commitment. It not appear in commitment in Annex 1 and Annex 2. There's 2 annexes for negative list. Annex 1 meaning which one we're not 100% open, like I said. There's something, like I opened only 19 and 51. The law clearly provided what articles, of the law, what level that issue that law, it has to be mentioned clearly. That's why I said negative list approach. It's quite modern, modern approach. It's only appropriate for developing country and developed country. Least developed country like us, it's quite confusing. It doesn't mean that what is provided there. For example, Annex 1. Annex 1 is 100% open. But if you see in Annex 1, it's open, but not 100%. There's some kind of forbidden. There's some kind of limitation. And you have to mention like what limitation are there, what law is related to. Annex 2, not open at all. If you don't see in Annex 1 and Annex 2, 160 subsector will be open. That's why it's quite difficult for least developed country like us. The 160 subsector, doesn't appear. If you don't list in Annex 1 and Annex 2, that means you open automatically. It's quite difficult for list developed countries like us. That's why we ask for transition period to further 10 years. That's a key thing for us. I mean, technically, I don't want to talk about that by being mandated by the government. I have to do that, because that's the trends. We need to follow the regional and global trends. And another difference from RCEP is we have auto MFN. Naturally, when we negotiate trade in services, we only negotiate MFN. If I can, I can. This is auto MFN. This equation, ASEAN RTKI, is not about auto MFN. That's why we say modern, it's quite modern RCEP for trade and services. We allow auto MFN, but it's lucky that LDC status like Lao, we still have transition period. We don't have the application on that. Transparency relief, we have not accepted. But when Lao is graduate from LDC, we have to do that, all of this, there's a challenges, for government, especially we need to prepare for regulation. Transition periods, I already covered. Local presence. You have to mention that, how much percentage. You have to put the limitation there. Domestic regulation is quite important. In WTO, we still discussing over the procedure, as mentioned, to facilitate investor. The regulation stipulated quite clear, but in fact, it doesn't follow the regulation. For example, applying licensing, 15 days, 15 days, you got to tell me. In practice, it's different. We do have regulation, but we don't follow. So we need to look at domestic regulation in that kinds of perspective. Some people give an example. You apply for licensing, you have to go to many places. I think if we have time at the end, I'll show you the website of the departments that relating to services. I want to show you here that the difference in 25 articles in the chapters, which is different from ASEAN Plus One agreement. Roughly, I have covered a lot. Like I said, the 10 key articles developed from ASEAN Plus One. This is just to show you what is open under the existing cooperation framework in ASEAN China. We not only open up for financial services, we open up education, business, distribution. We also open. There are about 30 subsector for AC, ASEAN China. You see that for trade and services, there's a lot of things that are open. For RCEP, 86 subsector. In AFAS is quite a lot. 100, about 100 subsector or something. In GATT, about 80 something. In ASEAN Plus One, in RCEP, 86 subsectors. It's quite a lot. I just want to show you that each trade cooperation framework, especially trade in services, what sector are open. I will talk about another chapter in M&P that are relating to trade in services. Is the movement of skilled person. There will be short-term, long-term, temporarily. In RCEP, in this chapter, we'll cover detail, even this article, but the scope of cooperation, market access is mentioned quite detailed. For example, you business visitor coming to Laos, you have to refer to migration law. I will just stamp you on arrival. You can stay in the country for 30 days. You can renew 2 times for providing supply services in our country. I mean, each country mentioned quite clear, for M&P. But below that, within 15 countries, for example, if 2 or 3 state party will do MBA for mutual recognition, they can make the country provisions on movement of natural persons. So in terms of skilled labor cooperation in the moment, how we facilitate investor. For example, the foreign investor in Laos, they don't have workers. They don't have a certain areas of expert to install the machine or something. They have to bring in from the headquarters. They can bring in the expert from the factory. So under the provisions of business visitor, they can be there for 30 days or something. If they're coming on contract, they have to mention clear what is already stipulated by the labor laws. Within 1 year, you got to have an ID card or working permit or something like that. In the commitment of the Lao PDR, it clearly mentioned the annex of M&P, movement of labor, both skilled and unskilled workers, whether you're going to have a temporary entries from the labor law and for the immigration law. I think it's stipulated quite clear in those 2 laws. Other countries as well. So it would be different. Some of the country allow the 90 days for business. Some allow maybe 30 days and they can renew 2 times. This is a M&P movement with natural person, the RCEP. You look at this one, I think we open up in RCEP, what do we get? What should we prepare for that? In terms of preparedness, we should not talk about now. We should talk before the negotiation, what the business sector, would get after signing. You look at the application, right? So what potential we will export? What potential of export during negotiation? I was also part of negotiation. I try to encourage all sector concerned because trade and services are relating to all ministry. There are 49 departments. We need to discuss with them, and we have discussed with them, and also with the business sector. What do you want? What kind of protections you would like to have? For example, ASEAN negotiation. At that time, we had a serious time for BLR. We do not want to use it. If they have a reason, LDC status can argue. For example, business you want protection, but don't be afraid that they're gonna collapse you. I think they're going to make you or destroy you. Most importantly, we open up according to existing regulation, and of course, like if investors come in, they're more strong. We try to find out by cooperating with them. Something. There are many options, many ways to do that. And of course, we open up based on existing regulation. I think in general, according to government policies, we want to invest. We open up to investment, allow people, if there's more investment, it will benefit a lot of areas. For example, create employment or something. If that means if our policy is good, it would be a base, a production base for export, and that's going to help facilitate a lot of things. In terms of import, etc. Another important thing would be that we negotiate in many frameworks. We try to promote our regulation. We were lucky the 15 years negotiation under the GATT framework. We have improved almost 100 sets of law. But still not enough, I would say, because trade in services, there are 12 main sector, 160 subsector. We have also improved accordingly. And of course, in terms of the promote cooperation under the different framework. We have actional assistance, for example, knowledge and technology transfer or something. I mean, if we have broader cooperative framework, and that's some opportunities, I would grab. What are the challenges? There's a lot of challenges as well. I think the Lao business is quite a young, mostly a young business in terms of competition. In terms of competitions, we much behind them. I mean, that's why domestic investor or business person will need to cooperate with the government. Most importantly, during negotiation, I invited the business sector during negotiation number of times. What do you want to have? What do you want to put as a deal for prevention or protection? Normally, they send a shipping guy, not decision maker. I'd like to get your cooperation more. I mean, if you would like to, you want government to protect you, for example, challenges in terms of transparency is quite challenging because the massive direction will have to mention the details. We need to discuss. What about review? So as a LDC, we skip LD MFN transparency list. We don't do that. If we graduate from LDC, we have to do all of this. And also dispute settlement. For example, do you have investor invest in Lao? If they have dispute, they can sue the government. ISDS before. They're from neighboring countries. Neighboring countries will have to propose to their own government. The government sue our government. Now they can sue directly to our government. This is quite challenging as well for Lao that we never used before. And the next one, transposition. Now we use positive lists. In the next 10 years, we have to develop negative lists. This is challenging for us. Another important one is financial support. It's difficult, without the financial support. We have limited number and limited financial finance. Overall, roughly about it, short time, I've been asked to stop already. I mean, if you have any further things to do, you can raise a question during the question and answer session. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you so much, Nongchit, for your presentation. You're very lucky because I'm in the chair, so you get the easy questions. If Sven was here, it would be much more difficult. Well, he missed out, so he doesn't get his tea break voucher. He knows the rules. He created them, live by them, die by them. So let me pose just a couple of questions. Then I'll open it up to the floor, see if there's anything. We are running short of time, unfortunately. So maybe if I'll start with Nong. From what you see, are Lao businesses in the service sector actually taking advantage of the FTA provisions by investing in neighboring economies? And maybe a follow-up question to that is, what more could be done to ensure Lao businesses do not lose out?
Thank you for the question. As I said, how we attract investor. I think government would have to have a clear policy. It doesn't mean that what commitments that we would put into that kind of a commitments. What are the incentive to attract investment? I think that would be one thing. I don't mean that we only stick to ASEAN FTA. Other framework as well. So the business persons, they would look an area where they have more potential, where they will have more advantage or something. For example, RCEP, it's opened up so many different things. As I said, whether we enjoy the benefit, how we enjoy the benefit, what kind of benefits people enjoy from this FTA. Like I said, at the moment we face a lot of difficulties, and the government tried its efforts, to attract the investor. But to what I heard, we're going to kind of amend investment promotion law, and that may be a new policy provided to attract investor. I hope that there will be something new in the new investment promotion policy that will kind of support the cooperation under the FTA framework in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Deborah, your presentation this time was very positive about the services chapter, if we say compare it to the e-commerce chapter. What would you like to caution people about with the services chapter? Are there things that potential downfall, pitfalls that they should be aware of?
Good question. Before I say anything, though, can I just say once again, like, how amazed I am at our interpreter, who has done an unbelievable job. So thank you so much.
Thank you too.
I'm assuming it's good in Lao. I can just say his English translation sounds to me to be phenomenal. Pitfalls. The real problem with trade and services always is that it's a domestic, services are really about domestic regulations. They're about the rules in the place where you want to deliver the services that apply to your delivery of services. And again, what are services? Training, consulting, bookkeeping, engineering services, education, tutoring, health services of all kinds, construction. So there are a lot of services, and most of those are, of course, regulated domestically, because you can imagine we want to be sure that this hotel does not fall down while we sit here because the engineers who designed it did a poor job, or the architect forgot to add electric power points. So we have rules at the domestic level to ensure that our healthcare is delivered in a way that is appropriate, that our children are well educated, that our hotels do not collapse around our ears, that our retail establishments may have a potential license if they're going to serve food or alcohol. So those are all domestic level regulations. And in the past, it was difficult to trade services, because how would you deliver a service across a border? Now, of course, we deliver all sorts of things, including online and digital services. And so we're very aware of domestic regulations that are different in different markets. What RCEP tries to do is to say in the chapter, here are rules that are consistent about what you can and cannot do. But they're not identical, and they're not that deep, because they do not say, as an example, if we're going to build a hotel, here are the regulations you must follow for engineers or for architects or for getting your plans approved or for having a construction company where they have to inspect the process every floor. those are still in place. Those kinds of issues are still in place. And some governments in RCEP are more aggressive at putting restrictions in place than others. Some are much more relaxed and will be easier to do services, cross-border services, than other markets. And so my big caution is that while you may have the right under RCEP to deliver that service, so I think back to food delivery, as far as I know, was not counted out of any RCEP schedule. I would have to look carefully, but I don't think it's out. So you can deliver food delivery services. But as you heard this morning, there are still requirements that are different in Laos than they are in Thailand, and they're different from Singapore. And so you as a company can deliver the service, but you may have to deliver it differently if they're in different markets. And so another final point I would make on this, to go back to food delivery, if the payment infrastructure doesn't work here for food delivery, then we have to pay cash on delivery. That then is not in RCEP. It doesn't say that you're allowed to deliver food and you have the payment system that works automatically. That doesn't work that way. So you still have to adapt to local conditions, local regulations. And my hope in RCEP is that as we implement it, we will start focusing on some of those domestic laws and regulations that can be carved back, made consistent, eliminated entirely, where they do not serve a purpose for the domestic consumer, and they certainly do not provide a service for the RCEP service delivery. So there are many regulations that we think, well, this actually makes no sense or makes no sense any longer, and we could eliminate that. My hope is that with RCEP, we start to develop that conversation and we eliminate some of those challenges. And again, I've already said this before, I shall say it one more time. Please do communicate what are the kinds of obstacles that you face, otherwise they will never get addressed, because no one will know that this is a problem, since most government officials in RCEP have never run a business before, and they have never run a business in your sector, probably. They won't know your barriers if you don't actually communicate that. And so when they ask, and I'm so delighted that you asked, please respond. Because how can he possibly solve a problem for you if he doesn't even know it's a problem?
Nong, do you want to say something?
เกี่ยวกับคำถามเมื่อกี้นั้นเนาะ
Back to the earlier question, I'd like to add on the point that because what is related to RCEP is that suppose movement of labor, for example, you bring in foreign architect, is relating to the construction standards in RCEP. You know, the movement of labor, it mentioned quite clear that which skill are open. For example, like in ASEAN, we have 7 MRA that is recognized mutually. They have to register that you're an architect, you can work in Laos. In ASEP, it's also mentioned clear in that chapter, if the two state parties, 3 state parties, you can issue, you know, a kind of mutual recognition agreement or something. ASEP. More importantly, as mentioned, the key point, the heart of RCEP is domestic regulation. Domestic regulation, even that it exists, but implementing it's quite it's different. That's important as well. So even the agreement is quite modern, new, modern, transparent. But in reality, you know, in the execution, there's something increased like procedure. Most importantly, domestic regulation is important. I just want to add that.
Thank you. I'm going to take one question from the floor, if there is, preferably from someone who hasn't spoken before. So the gentleman over there. Yep, that you. And if you say your name and
อย่าลืมชื่อนะว่ามาจากพรรคส่วนไหนนะชื่อเรามาจากพรรคส่วนไหนนะ
เจ้าขออนุญาต
Allow me to speak aloud. Thank you very much. The speaker, thank you very much for explaining. My name is Bunthon Supawong, lecturer at the Faculty of Economics and Business Administration, National University. I'm interested in the point on trading services. I'm not saying it's new, it's something that people not often pay attention to, particularly in the Lao Business. And that's why I have a question. In fact, I like to ask both of you. I mean, either of you can respond. That would be great. Or both of you can respond. That would be great. One thing is about liberalizations of trading service. I think it's good. We should open, but nevertheless, in the Lao PDR, we need to look at sector by sector, which service sector where we have potential or not have potential. I think that's an important thing. That's why I'd like to ask you, is there any sector you think from your study, from your review, that need to be protected in Lao PDR? Which sector? That's the first question. Second question, access to information sources. In Lao, we have Lao Service Portal Trade. That's is a good source of information. Nevertheless, but access to information, either the information on trade in services of the Lao PDR with foreign countries. In addition to World Bank, we can find sources of many organizations, but again, it's not easy to access. I mean, the detailed information, the list of commodity, list of services is not easy to access. I'd like to ask, is there any plan for disclose or access information? Like I said, information is very important, for the policy planning in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You actually sneaked in two questions there. So perhaps, Nong, you would like to answer the first question and Deborah the second.
Yeah, you can add. I do first, then you can add. ขอบใจนะอาจารย์
Thank you, lecturer. Thank you. Good question. In fact, it's not new, as you said, right? We have joined we joined ASEAN in 1997. We have a negotiator of trade and services. Like I said, it related to many ministries. To talk about negotiation mechanism, we start with internal mechanism. In fact, I have involved in negotiation for a number of years, more than 10 years. Easy for domestic negotiation, very difficult for external negotiations. If we don't have anything to defense for, it's not that easy. Like I said, the most difficult part will be you do the homework. If you have a case study, we look at that, what is the potential in WTO and ASEAN, what we should protect, what we should preserve. We should have done the homework. You may access to the website of Lao Portal Trades. I mean, we have a lot of information there. For example, in the sector of tourism, there's a potential. What would be the changes in terms of services in this sector? What we preserve, general, we preserve something that we reserve something relating to. I show you. We not open up every sector. For example, something related to culture, safety, security. I mean, those things are quite sensitive. We do not open. It's reserved anyhow. Back to the information you asked, trade in services. It's quite difficult for data collection, for example, mode 1 and mode 2. How many times they call, for example, mode 2, consumption abroad, for example, you go Thailand, you may get data from the immigration police officer, but when you're trying to collect the data, I usually get information or data from LSB, Lao Statistic Bureau, they are one committee working for ASEAN anyhow. You can get the information from Lao Statistic Bureau, but mainly you can get the information from the Department of Import and Export in trade in goods. For services, I usually draw the information from the Bank of the Lao PRI and also from Lao Statistic Bureau, especially the data investment. What is the total volume investments? They provide me that kind of information, but it's not easy, you know. Mode 1 and Mode 2 is different. Mode 3, they invested, they have registered the investment. That will be easy to collect. Mode 4, we look at the Ministry of Labor and Social Welfare, how much labor inbound and outbound, you know. I mean, the label will cover what is the potentials, how much, you know, like for electoral level, intellectual levels, how much is allowed in terms of labor, base labor, how much is allowed in the level. It really provides a number, the number of inbound and outbound labor. I think Statistic Bureau have done it. From what I know, that like almost 2 years, you know, they will issue one time from the survey. So if you want to get specific data, you can add LSB, you know, for detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Nong. Deborah?
Statistics are terrible on services everywhere because they're hard, again, they're hard to see. You can't drop them on your toe. And so trying to track them has always been difficult. And especially as we move to the digital world, it gets worse. So trying to measure what is the trade and services in the digital space, very hard to do. So I feel your pain, but it is hard. And on services, the one thing I should have said that RCEP does not do is RCEP does not open up government procurement. So the things that government buys in goods or services, travel, tourism, consulting like this one, airfares, paper clips, paper, whatever it is that a government buys is not open at the moment in RCEP. So that is actually a big part of the economy in many markets that is not eligible for RCEP trade. Also, there are restrictions, as you might imagine, around national security concerns, always around public health, public morals, animal life, plant life, health. So there's some exceptions that we always have that are also in RCEP, including in services, and always around defense and security issues. So there are certain areas that are carved out of this agreement from the beginning in all of the markets. And then over time, again, perhaps there is a discussion in RCEP on government procurement, but no commitments. So at some point, maybe we will start to open up procurement markets because that is a big consumer of goods and services.
Thank you, Deborah. Can we thank our two speakers for this session, Mr. Nong and Deborah? And we are going to move to the second session, which I will hand back to Sven to moderate. I think Deborah will be staying on stage. Is that true? No, that's after. Sorry, no coffee break yet. We'll complete the, unless I am wrong, I can get you a coffee if you like.
Okay. No. I was going to use the bathroom.
So Sven.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm not sure Jeremy did a good job, but maybe he deserves a round of applause for his moderation. Thank you, Jeremy. And I thank you, Debbie, for staying. Yeah. Right. And we have another speaker as well for this session. Is it Miss Nongchit? Nongchit? No. No handover between the two moderators. Oh, yeah. It's Pilepon Vongpraset. Is that correct? Or Pili from the Solver Laos Seoul, and as well as the Vice President of the Young Entrepreneur Association of Lao PDR. Right. I think we right. So allow me to introduce our second speaker. Deborah, I hope you don't mind me not presenting you again, but I can always do so if you insist. We have Miss Pilepon Vongprasut, or Pili, right? Who is the founder and the CEO of the company called the Solver Lao Soul Company Limited. And in addition to this, she also accumulates a number of other positions: Vice President of the Young Entrepreneur Association of Laos, Board Member of the ASEAN Young Entrepreneur Council, Vice Chair of the ASEAN Young Women Entrepreneur Club, Chairperson of the ASEAN CSR Network of Laos, and mentor for the Young Entrepreneur Innovation Challenge. Is that correct? Have I missed anything? No? All right. So let me open the page. Right. So obviously we are going to focus on trade and services on the PPE number 4. And you've heard the presentation before on the contents of the agreement, some of the responses by our second speaker, and we expect that you also have questions more related to businesses, to private sector services trade in Lao PDR. That's why we wanted to have these sessions. And again, I have a number of questions to ask to our two speakers. Amelia will indicate if we have questions from our online participants, and we will also have a number of questions, I'm sure, in the room. And if we don't have questions in the room, we still have Dinu, always here ready to ask questions. So thank you, Dinu, for your help. Right. Ms. Pilepon, if I may start with you. So we've heard from your CV that you are involved in a number of associations, sectors, more or less all related to entrepreneurs, digital and services. We've also heard yesterday that Laos is actually dependent on really few commodities. So maybe there is room or there is potential for diversifying in the services sector. So my first question to you is, according to you, based on your experience, the work you are doing, what are the most promising services that Lao PDR could export?
That's the tough questions, because as Deborah already mentioned, Mr. Nongchit as well, it's very hard to quantify the trade service, and especially you're talking about exporting the services as well. It's even harder to quantify that. But I will, based on the statistics that published by the UN Comtrade, for example, the figures from 2020, the revenues for the service trade is $1.18 billion for Lao PDR exporting the service, and 90% or maybe 85% of it is travel, personal travel that include educations, tour, like tourists, medical treatment, plastic surgery now, and the main destination is Singapore, China, and Korea, because plastic surgery, where else? A lot of tour now become more innovative. They package together the shoppings, the tour site, together with medical treatment and plastic surgery services. So that's still our strength, and I would think it's still promising sector and service to continue because it earns us around $934 million per year. So I think we should keep this sector, followed by transportations. If the Lao airline, for example, I'm just gonna go example right away so that you can visualize it and understand with me. Lao airline. They can add more routes, and that, for example, next month maybe, or this month, they're adding Da Nang, Vietnam. That can export and link to the tourism sector as well. We have insurance, which earn us about $27 million per year. And that's also linked to tourism as well. I think it's well linked together for, transportations, insurance. Apart from that, it's just a small services like professional service that we have. And ICT is not bad as well. ICT, we have actually, you might be surprised, we have the company that developed a software, the government e-service in Africa, Malawi, for example. It's the company called Siberia. They export their service, the IT service, software development, for example. We have an evidence of the data center here where they do the transit. They don't want to do it in Thailand or in Vietnam, but they do it in Laos, for example. People can relate it to TikTok. So it's the content delivery service, the network transit that use the service here in Laos, actually. You'll be surprised. And we also have the Lao satellite. We're selling the channel to Cambodia and Nepal. And we're starting to add more and more of these telco services. So the data service are also potential and promising. And I think Mr. Nongchit already mentioned, we have some of the reserved sector that we want to look at and preserve it. And tourism, ICT are probably the one that we should foster and, build that up from what we have, I think, yes.
Right. So it's not too bad for difficult questions. I think we've learned a lot about, names of company, exporting services. So I hope we have recorded that because there was a lot of questions, a lot of interesting points. Out of curiosity, as part of the Young Entrepreneur Association of Laos, is there a kind of segment or chapter helping businesses in Laos to start their export journey? Or is it really looking like inwards domestic businesses only?
Well, I lots of emerging ideas of having the services export out to other countries, especially in Vietnam and in Cambodia. We are working with the Young Entrepreneur Network because we also are a member of the ASEAN Young Entrepreneur Council. So we work together with other 9 countries to exchange the services and trying to establish ourselves in other countries. For example, it's not just service, but also like wood processing. We're trying to export to Brunei, for example. And a lot of us realize the importance of digital platform. So we are now preparing ourselves to have recruited technology and putting ourselves into, digitalized, platform so that we can be up to date and expand our service, electronically on the e-commerce platform and all that. And that has potential at the cross-border as well for the trades.
So maybe you could even get some coaching from Deborah, because I'm going to ask Deborah what recommendations she could have for Lao business providers who would like to start their export journey, let's say within ASEAN. What are the best practices? What are the sources of information or of support or advice that they could tap into?
I'm going to hold that one for 1 second, and I'm going to say, remember that the way we count services exports, some of us are participating in exports right now, which is those of us who came in from overseas are here consuming services in this hotel. That's considered an export, even though it doesn't feel like an export. That's actually an export. An inbound tourism is considered a services export. And you are all participating in services exports because you are listening to these foreigners telling you things, education services. So we are consuming services that are part of the export basket, even if they are done here in Laos. So I think there are services that can be provided to tourists which of course this is a staple of this economy for quite some time, can continue to be expanded. You know, I noticed yesterday when I was walking in the amount of hotels that are being built that are coming in, including this enormous Holiday Inn next door. All of that will also drive services, but you also need to, I would suggest, make it much easier for tourism to be inbound. It took me 13 hours to get here from Singapore. And I would say to you, why would I take 13 hours, as lovely as this place is, from Singapore? I could have been in the US in 13 hours. You know, I could have been in Europe in 13 hours. So you have got to sort out some of that inbound travel and tourism delays and obstacles, because it's expensive and 13 hours is crazy. And when I got here, I had to stand in a very annoying, extraordinarily slow $40 line to get a visa. And even if I had done it online, I still would have had to stand in quite a long line and have them re-enter the information from my electronic visa and still take my $40. That is not the impression you want to leave a tourism with. You want a tourist to come in and feel welcomed by your country and not stuck in a miserable, hot, crowded room for an hour and a half waiting to pay a visa fee. So, you know, you have got to make it easier, I think, for those services in the travel and tourism space. And then again, try to offer innovative things, because that is a bedrock. And for many of your companies, they can start by offering services here to incoming tourists, which has, in my view, the advantage of ensuring that the product offering is suitable for the appropriate audience, so that you have tailored it to the needs of people based on your experiences here, and then you can potentially export those. So I would say that first. And then second, as mentioned yesterday, you know, you have a number of, especially young entrepreneurs who are every bit as competitive as any other set of entrepreneurs across this region. And so I think there are lots of ways for firms to export their services and lots of opportunities. Pick your markets carefully. You don't want to start with the most competitive, most challenging, most expensive markets, but pick the right market that where you're providing a service that is otherwise not provided or is specifically tailored to niche, and that tends to do very well. And then finally, you know, I cannot strongly urge enough that you work with others who have experience. So I think, you know, the Young Entrepreneurs Association is great. Mentorships are fantastic. An opportunity to share experience is great. You have in this room a number of the reverse, which is entrepreneurs who have come here to provide services. They can also be a valuable resource because they can describe what is it like to try to deliver a service in a foreign market, what were the issues they had to encounter, what experiences can they share. And then the last thing that I will just mention that I think is useful for companies is to work with trade associations and to chambers of commerce, because they will know a lot about markets. So, you know, yesterday, for example, Jeremy and I were at the Australia-Lao 70th anniversary, something or other. And that is, if you were to imagine, I want to be in the Australian market, you can go here and start meeting people who have connections in the Australian market, who understand the market there and can help you design business plans and approaches that will allow you to penetrate the Australian market from here in Laos. So take advantage, I would suggest, in short, of opportunities here to develop the networks, refine the models, prepare the whatever it is your service you're going to do, so that when you enter that new market, you are as competitive as you can be.
Yes, and it's a very good transition to the next PPD, 5 on investment, because what we've been hearing also from Australian investors in Lao PDR is that the best way to promote investment or to promote export of services to, for instance, Australia or elsewhere, is also to talk to the existing investors here who have gone through the process of investing, setting up a business, and maybe exporting. So they know what works from here and then what would work in the destination market. So using the chambers, domestic but also foreign chambers, is also a very good way to understand how to start your business. I would like to open up the floor to our audience. Amelia, is there any question online? I saw one, but it's not related to services, so I'm going to skip that one. It will be for the next year PPD. I have a gentleman in the front, not Dinu, the one next to Dinu. And then I have, yeah, go ahead. Please let us know your name, your organization, and who the question is directed to.
Thank you very much. My name's David Ormsby. I'm the Executive Director of the Australian Chamber of Commerce, and we were very happy to have Deborah there and Jeremy as well last night at our monthly sundowner. And I did just want to jump in and say, yes, absolutely, we are very happy to help provide some introductions to Australian companies and help sort of facilitate, to some extent, as much as we can, trade within Australia. So if there is anybody who is interested in that, please come and say hello just while we're speaking about foreign chambers. Thanks, Deborah.
So no question.
No, just a bit of self-promotion.
All right. That's okay. Australia is a sponsor of the event, so we can let that go. Thank you. Yes, please.
ข้าพเจ้าชื่อศิวัตรเนาะเป็นนักกฎหมาย
My name
เนาะ
is Sivat, lawyer. Can I like to have one question? And I also want to leave with you with the comments. Did you talk about the export of services? How do you interpret export of service before our company provide services in Singapore? When we send the invoice, it's a VAT zero. If you export services, that means you have to fly to Singapore. That means it's export of service, and that we cannot have a price comparative. When we send three quotation, we use 10%, but the foreign companies say, is your quotation would not be considered or something. I'd like to ask the ministry concerned, please consider that. It's not only promotion of concession agreement or agriculture. We invest, we pay taxes, we pay profit taxes internally to government. They should promote, like export of services. I'd like to ask, how do you define export services? How do you find it? Or the person have to fly to provide services there? For example, we provided services not about Lao, abroad, before 2021, they said it's the export of services. They put in zero. I like to ask, secondly, observation on services. Services is one of the key sectors, but we have a COVID pandemic. We want to be competitive. We want to attract the investor. The tariff should be lower than this. Many of you concerned that I want to protect my services sector. I asked them, what do you want? What do you want to be protected? Some sector you don't have anything to be protected. You should bring in other people to kind of strengthen your domestic personnel. Thank you.
So actually, your question about delivery of services brings up something important about RCEP, especially when we think about digitally delivered services. It is possible to deliver a service. You don't go anywhere. You stay here, you deliver the service in Australia. You don't have to fly to Australia to deliver a service. But one obstacle we often find to the cross-border delivery of services is a requirement for what is called a local presence. You must have a registered business in whatever market you might work in. And then that local presence then is available for licensing and registration and payment of taxes and whatever. That is a problem for especially small businesses in the digital age. So increasingly, and this is true in RCEP as well, we have eliminated requirements for local presence, which means that you can sit in Lao and deliver services into Australia without having to have anyone on the ground in Australia. Now that's especially important if, let's imagine, I am a small business that provides graphic design. So if I provide graphic design services, I could do that anywhere in the world, for any market, for anyone, anywhere. But if I have to have a presence in every market where I might deliver my graphic design expertise, I can't, that's too expensive for me as a small business. So one big advantage of digital and agreement like RCEP is we eliminate the local presence requirement. You can sit here and deliver overseas. That is extremely helpful and allows the micro multinational on the services side to find customers and suppliers anywhere. That's very important, and it is a benefit of RCEP I should have mentioned, because it does make a big difference. You don't have to travel, you don't have to set up a business, assuming, key caveat, that the other government, or in the reverse here in the Lao government, allows that delivery of those services. So again, you have to check and make sure that you can in fact deliver architectural services online. Most people are not fussed about graphic design, but sometimes they are upset about about engineering services. So you have to double check and make sure that those are available, and then you don't need the local presence.
Thank you, Deborah. Maybe just to answer the first part of the question of the gentleman, can you, maybe you showed that in your slide and I was not there, I'm sorry for that. What are the different modes of supply of services? Because, do we have to travel to Singapore to provide a service?
Okay, so think back in your head, right? Imagine that it's 1990. Some of you weren't even born, I know, but those of you who were, 1990, you are a trade official working for the World Trade Organization at the time in Switzerland, right? You have now been told you must design an agreement to manage trade and services. Okay, well, in order for me to do that, I have to figure out how do we classify services. And so they came up with this plan at the time, which made a lot of sense. Let's define services by who or what moves. So mode 1, they said, nobody moves. I stay, you stay, and all we do is we trade the service between us over the border. At the time, by letter, mostly. Some people had fax machines then, but there was no email, there was no internet, there was none of that. So we're gonna send it by mail. That's mode 1. So the service moves, you stay put. Now that at the time, some governments were very ambitious and they said, actually, I can't imagine anything moving by mail. I open all of that up. It's all open for trade. Now in the digital age, some governments are regretting that decision because now digitally we can deliver a lot of things. But at the time, some governments were like, yeah, whatever, deliver it by mail. And some governments were very nervous. They said nothing, no delivery in this way. So mode 1, nobody moves. Mode 2 is I go to you to consume the service. So I, the customer in this case, go to your market and I get medical tourism. Okay, now I have flown to there to have whatever it is, the procedure done, the hotel, whatever. That's mode 2. So I move to you. Mode 3, you come to my country to set up an operation. A facility, a business, a company, or whatever. So you come to me and you set up the hospital to do plastic surgery here, mode 3. Most people call it investment, but we still pretend it's only about services. And then mode 4 is I, the individual, temporarily move to give you the service. I fly to your house to do a nose job in your living room, okay? And I do that because for whatever reason, that's what you want, and I'm being paid well, I go to your house. So I, the service person, move. So those were the way that they cut up services at the time. Now for companies, for the most part, this just makes no sense because a company says, We deliver all of those ways. We deliver it digitally. We deliver it by investing. We have our people come and set up operations. You come and you use the service. And so a lot of companies do not like these modes of delivery because it seems weird to them. But that's where it came from. That's how we came up with this idea in the first place. And as I mentioned in my presentation, as we move to negative listing, in a negative list, it doesn't matter how you deliver the service. If the service is plastic surgery, like I make a restriction on plastic surgery, it doesn't matter how I deliver that, whether it's online through video, whether that's through some weird robot thing that I am sitting here and you're over there and I'm doing surgery on you through robot, whether you come to me, whether I go to you. If I make a restriction in a negative list, the mode of delivery doesn't matter anymore. So we used to classify it this way. We are increasingly shifting away from that because it's just too complicated to easily slice up how we deliver services. VAT is different. So tax is different. Tax is someone else's problem. Remember, that's finance department, a central bank problem. But it is increasingly an issue. And here's where it becomes a real problem, is that local presence. Because if I can deliver a service anywhere and I don't need a local presence, but I have to pay VAT, the result of that is the foreign company, may have to have a local presence because otherwise I can't, there's no tax ID number. I don't have a bank account to pay in local currency, so I can't pay that VAT without having a local presence. So another implication of having this cross-border VAT is it's hard for small businesses to operate because I have to have a local presence, which is illegal in some agreements, in every market where I might do business. So increasingly, I would say the tax and trade, which used to be very separate, is becoming a real challenge. But on an institutional level, like who is responsible for that? Everybody says, not my problem. So right now, unfortunately, it's a mess for businesses.
Thank you, Deborah. Questions? Yes, Lucas?
Technical question to Deborah, I think. If I have a local Lao company, 100% owned by the United States company or European, and this Lao company is going to Chinese market, is it considered as a RCEP company?
That is such a good question. I should have mentioned this sooner. In a trade agreement, we don't care where you pay taxes and we don't care where you are registered. What matters is where are you, let me phrase this, where are you geographically and where are you delivering something? So if your company is here in Laos and it's registered in Germany, but you have a Lao registration for your local company, you are a covered RCEP firm. If you are providing services from Laos into Thailand, you are covered by RCEP. Even if your tax is French and your CEO is Italian and your finance board of directors, whatever, is full of Europeans, as long as you are here and you are considered a Lao firm in some way, you count as a covered Lao company for the purposes of using RCEP.
Questions that side of the room? No? So Dinu, you have the floor. Can we get the microphone to Mr. Dinu? Yeah, coming.
Check. Okay, actually, this is building on to Lucas's question. What if I'm a Lao company, but I also have a company in Singapore, Thailand, and then we are having services working amongst each other. according to the RCEP rules, because Singapore would be a little different from the Lao rule, where do I fall in? Can I choose which place to?
I guess I would say, I don't know necessarily why it matters, but it might.
Yeah.
Because it's possible that if you said the service is being delivered out of our Singapore branch, we have better access from the Singapore side into wherever than I do out of here, except that. So in trade in goods, I mentioned that some of the governments have tariff schedules that apply to specific countries. So China for ASEAN, China for New Zealand, China for Australia. They have very different schedules. In services, they don't do that. So in services, the schedule is the schedule for everybody. So the only reason I can think of for why you would care, whether it's Singapore or Lao, is that the Singaporeans have gotten or have given more access than the Lao version. And if you do the services and you say they're being delivered out of Singapore, it might make it easier for you to deliver into fill in the blank where or into Singapore.
Well, basically we do corporate retreats. So we move people from Singapore, Hong Kong, India, and we take them for corporate retreats for a week, 10 days. Right now it's pretty straightforward because we just use like your tourism and travel capacity building thing, so it's fine. But with respect to RCEP, would these change?
Well, I think so. That's a good question. What you would want to do is look at the Lao schedule and say, can I deliver these services into Lao under Lao's schedule? And then if the answer is yes, fantastic. If the answer is perhaps not, you might still be able to do so because you're a Lao registered company, so you might have access, which would be great. But you might also look at the Singapore schedule and see what Singapore has.
Right.
You don't normally, this is called forum shopping. You don't normally forum shop like this for services. For trade in goods, sometimes you do. So if I had two factories, one here and one in Vietnam, and I could make the same product in both factories, then I might have an incentive to say, what's the difference in schedule between what Lao provides and what Vietnam provides, or more urgently, what the Chinese factory that I have provides. And so you can then say, actually, for this order, I'm going to ship it out, make it and ship it out of our Chinese branch, because it's going to give us better tariff benefits. But we don't tend to see that on services, especially in something like RCEP, because it's consistent. Where you would have the forum shopping on services, though, is if you said, I actually want to provide services to Europe, because I don't think Lao has any agreement with Europe, you would say, well, actually for us, the Singapore branch might be very useful because there is an EU-Singapore FTA, and they might have better benefits into Europe for services from the Singapore branch than we get from here. So you'd have, then you're trying to figure out, forum shopping, where is it best for me?
Thank you, Deborah. I have a last question maybe to Philly, is actually these type of questions that participants are directing to Deborah. Unfortunately, starting tomorrow, Deborah will no longer be here, so it's a bit difficult for Deborah, although she can provide a service across borders. Is it something that the association, the Young Entrepreneur Association of Laos, or maybe LNCCI plans to provide or can provide this type of answer of advisory services on where to start your services journey, your export journey, where to base your business, why do you do it in Laos versus other countries? Is something that you can provide to businesses?
Currently, I'm a quality champion, the export quality champions for Europe market, and through the ERIA Plus. Under the International Trade Center, they're building up a workforce and build capacity here in Laos in aims that we could, the National Chamber of Commerce and Young Entrepreneur Association can provide these services, advisory services to many interest entrepreneurs that, the company that want to export the services and products as well. Right now, they're focusing on the coffee, and wood processing, but expanding for food processing and other services as well. And the USAID also trying to help build capacity and acquiring international standards for the ICT sector as well, so that they can also provide services in Myanmar, in Cambodia. So this is like an ongoing emerging help that we get from international organizations. And if RCEP actually like have a program that can build a local capacity that could provide this service, add on to that, I think it will be very beneficial for all of us as well, because like many of us here also ask questions, simple questions like this, that when Deborah is not here, it might be somebody else that can answer that. I think it's brilliant. Yes.
We have a booklet on services for RCEP that we did for Singapore's Ministry of Trade and Industry. That's on the QR codes on all the slides. So you can look at that. It's all about, one of the booklets we did is all on RCEP services. Of course, it's aimed at Singapore because it was procured by Singapore government, but the general rules apply the same. So if you're interested, please do take a look at that.
Right. Thank you for the precisions. Any other questions? The last burning question before we close this PPD number 4? No, I don't see any. Right. So, well, thank you very much, Deborah, Philly, for your responses. I think it's very useful. I saw people taking notes, so I guess more members to the Young Entrepreneur Association of Laos very soon, and maybe more questions across border to Deborah as well. Yeah. So we will stop now. It's 3 p.m. We are going to stop for 15 minutes for coffee break, and right after the coffee break, we'll start the last PPD on investment, on the investment chapter. Thank you. See you in 15 minutes.